most of the people will be back in the room, and also the presenter of the next paper is already in the room, so we'll continue with this session with one of the massive experiments that are no longer ongoing, but the results will be out soon. Matti Sarvimäki from Aalto University is presenting this.
For the invitation. So this is a paper just with Randomized and me for this Nordic economic policy review. The actual paper on the effects has, I think, 13 or 14 co-authors at the moment. So that this has been an enormous project also in terms of the research coalition. Like we have had to do a lot of things, and we have needed many types of expertise to do it. But let me start the kind of way I start the kind of academic presentations on those where we are allowed to show the results, which is not going to be today because we have been giving this in academic conferences, but not for policymakers, since no one at the Ministry of Education really knows the results yet, so I'm not going to reveal them today. They will be published in January. But the broad background on is something we have been talking about quite a bit already today. This kind of an idea that early investments are more efficient than later investments. This is often referred to as a Heckman curve, and if you look at like this is a very influential paper within economics, Henry and Kaiser's 2020 paper, where they try to kind of put the marginal value of public funds, like calculate what's the most efficient way of using public funds. There's a kind of a bunch of dots in this graph, which are basically the x-axis is the age at which an intervention takes place, and you can kind of see there that there's many of the really big success stories are from early education interventions. But it's also the case that the evidence which this relies on comes from kind of very particular context. So most of these are American programs that are targeted to disadvantaged American populations. So if you look at things like the Head Start, you have to be below poverty line in order to be eligible in the US. And these are like early childhood, like preschools, kindergartens, these sort of things, where the alternative is to be at home or in some informal care. And given the population, you would expect this to be a very disadvantaged environment for a child. So if you're a kind of a policymaker in a country like Finland or any kind of Nordic country, most European countries, this is not really the question you try to answer. The problem that you try to solve is not that the kids would be at home in very disadvantaged conditions, but that they would be in other kind of a daycare or some kind of center-based care. And the questions you need to answer then are actually very different than what we have been looking at the literature or the earlier literature look at. So these are questions of how should we be, should we be a kind of structured or more play-based approach? What happens in the centers? Do we need teachers to have minimum qualifications? On what kind of qualifications? Should it be voluntary? Should it be left to the parents to decide whether the kids participate, or should it be mandatory? At some stage, every country starts to say that at this age you have to go to school or a preschool. So our kind of starting point here is that we didn't really have that much evidence that was helpful for an incoming government in 2019 that was very committed on reforming education policy and made a large reform on extending the school leaving age from 16 to 18. That was a policy implemented during that government. But there was also the discussion on whether we should go to the other direction. Should we kind of, I always get into trouble saying that mandatory education starting at age 6 is obligatory or mandatory. There's different words. to me, it all sounds like you have to go to preschool at age 6. But anyone listening and getting offended, I'm sorry, I can't learn these words apparently. What was the idea was that if we would have a preschool starting at age 5 instead of age 6, kids would kind of have to go. And it would be somewhat different kind of things that they would be doing at age 5 than age 6. So would that be helpful? Particularly, would it be helpful for leveling the playing field? So that the big concern was that kids were starting school at age 7, the kind of proper school, from very different kind of starting points. That was the concern, and this was seen as the most potential way of leveling that playing field. Every party, apart from the Finns party and the Center party, was campaigning on extending preschool in 2019. The Social Democrats were the only ones saying that we want to experiment on this. The next election, they forgot the experimentation part, so even the Social Democrats were, while the experiment was ongoing, they were kind of promising to implement a 2-year preschool. So in that sense, this is a kind of a key policy among the minds of the policymakers, at least, that this has kind of been given as a promise to kind of increase equality of opportunity for Finnish children. But very kind of unexpectedly, for me at least, they didn't just do the typical thing and just legislate and make a reform. Instead, the government agenda stated that we will pilot a 2-year preschool, and then we got a call at Aalto to come to the ministry and talk about what could those 3 words, pilot 2-year preschool, what could those actually mean? To be honest, I did not go to that meeting with great expectations. This was a ministry that was not known for openness to RCTs, to put it mildly. But I thought this was a great opportunity to kind of start a long process that eventually in a decade or 2 we might be able to kind of change the way people were thinking. So, I took my 10 PhD student, Rami decided with me, and thought it was helpful for him too to see how policy actually gets made. So we wrote a proposal, and like 6 months later, the parliament legislated what we proposed. So, this did not take a long time, and it was kind of an utter shock for me that this actually went through, because then we actually had to implement it. So what we got, or what the legislation stipulates, is that there's a budget of 30 million euros, and there's the coercive power of the government. Basically, there's semi-mandatory participation for those kids who are randomized to the treatment group. So what I want to talk about today is, I really would love to talk about the results, but I will not. But I think there's a lot to be learned on kind of how did we manage to pull this off, since this was very much more complicated than anything else I had done before in terms of implementing the randomization and also not being able to rely on register-based data, which was kind of a new thing for an economist in a Nordic country. So I want to talk about that, and but before I get there, I'm going to give a brief kind of introduction on how did we get there, and then I'm going to go to details on setting up the experiment, how we designed it, and kind of crucially how we assess children's skills, and then I will conclude. Okay, so this is a bit of perhaps a subjective account on how running RCTs have changed in Finland. So I've been in the business for 20 years now, and when I started, there were people like my then supervisor Roope, who had been pushing for kind of more rigorous policy evaluation. Kari, my kind of mentor at the time as well, was also very much pushing for this kind of more credible research designs, with RCT, of course, being the kind of the gold standard. And every time you would say that we would, it would be best to randomize, somebody would say that, oh, but that's unconstitutional. And I always had this sense that, well, is it? Like, we're economists. It's kind of hard to argue towards that. But it's actually people who are making this claim are not lawyers either. But somehow there was this kind of myth of unconstitutionality for randomization, because it deviates from equal treatment of people. Of course, that's a serious business. But somehow it was completely okay to deviate from equal treatment by geographical basis and run pilots in geographical areas where basically municipalities would opt in, like the eager municipalities would get the treatment, the others would not. So it was okay to deviate from equality as long as you couldn't learn anything from the pilot. That was my interpretation of that. There were some RCTs during this era. So there was already in the 1990s there were these job search training trials by non-economists, but then Roope and Kari worked on this 2008 paper reanalyzing that data with psychologists. There was very influential kind of researcher-driven anti-bullying experiment, which was so successful that the Kiva anti-bullying treatment, it showed such a promise that it was actually adopted by most Finnish schools. But this was kind of coming from the research side and with kind of negotiation with schools, or basically, I think, randomizing who would get an offer. And there were some information experiments with the tax authorities and the customs, but that was it. And then things started to change. I mean, there was a new government, the prime minister coming from a business and engineering background, that was like overly excited about experimentation. Most of that was just completely silly stuff. So this was there was this website that reported like 900 experiments that were run during this period. And I see Jukka laughing, well, you must have been kind of great memories, right? Doesn't look like it's taken down now. I had to go to the Wayback Machine when I was writing this to see what was in there. But, so there's this huge fuss of creating this cultural experimentation, but kind of as part of that, we started to see kind of really ambitious experiments as well. Most importantly, the basic income experiment, which was importantly the first one where there was this specialized legislation just for this one experiment. And what that meant is that it would go through the constitutional committee in the parliament that would then take a stance on whether it truly is unconstitutional to run an RCT. And of course they said that no, that has nothing to do with the constitution. You do need to have a good reason for this, and you need to take all sort of safeguards. But learning what works is a reason to deviate from equality or kind of equal treatment. We do this all the time with medical trials, and that kind of the same principles were then used for social sciences. Excellent papers came out from that. As we learned that, giving very strong incentives for long-term unemployed people to find a job, like 23 percentage points decrease in participation tax rates, actually doesn't do anything on their employment. But it does seem to have positive effects on their well-being. And there were some other things done at the same time. The Immigration Integration Services paper we kind of were part of was mentioned several times today as well. But what I want to really talk about is that there was a new government, and they look like visually very different kind of a government, but also kind of coming from the other side of the political spectrum, and they made less fuss about the culture, the culture of experimentation. We didn't hear about those words anymore, but actually, they continued doing, like, implementing now less, but better designed experiments. And I'm going to talk about one of them today, and we already heard Elias to talk another one that was both of which were kind of implemented through this specialized legislation. And now we have, again, on the other side of the political spectrum, we have a new government, but kind of very kind of encouragingly, they are not, like many things change when the government changes, but this seems to be more permanent now. And it's also, I think, I was very happy when they wrote to their agenda that they will wait for our experiments before making decisions about the preschool, extending preschool. So, maybe this is not a government that is hard to persuade not to do something like that requires more spending, but so that would be a cynical view. But I think a more realistic view is that this is also a way of finding this kind of longer continuation between governments when you do actually good research, RCTs. And lately we've also been starting to work with the city of Helsinki, and I hope more municipalities. So, even though it was kind of uncomfortable with all this fuss about the culture of experimentation, I think things are changing in a kind of in a meaningful way. Okay, so let me tell you how we came to or how the process of design or getting from the mandate to legislation, but how that took place. First, let me just show you, this is the kind of a very broad picture of how our education system works. So the current system has a 1 year of preschool between early childhood education and care and comprehensive school, and the idea of the reform is just to make this 2 years with basically the same goals and same approaches, broadly speaking, but just having more time for also children who come from less advantaged backgrounds to have enough time to catch up before they start their kind of elementary school. So that was something that was given to us from the government. The research team had no role in kind of brainstorming what the policy would be. Our job was then to kind of figure out what would happen if the parliament passed the legislation that would say that from now on we have 2 years of preschool instead of 1. So the idea, so I talked about this already, so we had a very tight schedule actually. So in just like a month or two, we came up with a research proposal and made kind of suggested the redesign that was then implemented kind of all, we retaught some details, but the basic research design was there very fast. And I already told you how surprised I was in kind of getting it through, but I also was very surprised on how collaborative and constructive the discussions with the civil servants were. So during the summer, the ministry then prepared the draft bill. There was the round of public comments, like this is how legislation that gets done. A lot of comments. There was committee in the parliament, most importantly the constitutional committee, saying that this is actually, this is more. This is actually harder than most of the experiments if you think about the ethical side, because there is the mandatory element for participation in for the treatment group. It's not mandatory in the end in any strict sense, so parents can opt out. They just have to then make sure that the child learns these skills in another way than in a preschool, and it's not. So kind of there's no enforcement of that. So in practice, this is what we actually learned as part of this experiment, is that take-up was lower than we expected. Since we expected that if you have the same legislation as you have now for 6-year-olds, you would get like 99% participation as we have with 6 years old. Turns out that part of that participation is more of a social norm rather than just following the legislation. So that's kind of one thing to learn for an economist, that if you write a law, it doesn't mean that it's actually being implemented. But in the end, we did get the legislation, which kind of, part of it is almost copy-pasted from our research plan in the kind of the basic design part. I'll talk you through the research design in a second, but the second really important part was that all of us researchers are kind of often frustrated in data access and data costs, it turns out that if you get to write a law, and it's a good idea to write that you can get all the data that you need. That really helps things out. But by the kind of spring of 2021, there was, I think, about 8,000 households got a leaflet like this that literally started by saying, "Congratulations, your child is among those who have been selected for the test group." And then it kind of went. There were like many pages of information there, but if you look at there on the right column, it also says that you are obliged to attend to this to 2-year preschool. It also kind of tries to explain what this is. So there was some concern in the public debate when this was starting, that with the argument that 5-year-olds should be let to be kids, that it's too early to put them sit in a classroom, and everybody agreed on that since they were not put in the classroom. Like 6-year-olds are not sitting in a classroom and listening to teacher to give a lecture. All this is of course following the same kind of approach that we have for 1-year preschool, which is learning through play. Kind of kids don't even maybe realize that they're being taught kind of basic mathematical concepts or letters or things like that. And those things are not actually at the core of the curriculum in any case, since the aim of the preschool is to improve socio-emotional skills in order to prepare kids to be ready to kind of start their education, where the letters and the numbers and that stuff is going to be more of the thing of elementary school. Okay, good. This is transforming from my PDF to this PowerPoint doesn't seem to go entirely smoothly, but okay.
The instruction was to send in PowerPoint.
You know how many slides I have on LaTeX already? I mean, this is for yeah. Okay, let's put that aside. So here's how we did the actual design. So the first constraint that we had to deal with is that it was decided that this 2-year preschool can't happen in a school, and so there's various ways of organizing 1-year preschool in Finland, and some municipalities organize that entirely within elementary school, kind of, or primary schools, and there was going to be a very reasonable concern that if you put 5-year-olds into school environments, and then there's like an afternoon club with second graders in the worst case, that may not be a good idea. So from the outset it was restricted that this can happen only in centers that have both preschool and normal daycare. And that actually, there's actually quite a few municipalities in Finland that do not have any center like that. So they were excluded right away. I mean, it looks kind of more dramatic on a map. It's not like it's not like many people live in these municipalities. So in terms of representativeness for the population, this is not a big deal. But it is, of course, important in terms of what kind of treatment this really is. So this is kind of different from how some kids experience their 1-year preschool at the moment. Once we were done with that, we kind of split the municipalities into small and large ones. And what we meant by small municipality was that there was fewer than 5 eligible centers. The idea here being that if you're a small municipality and there's like if we ask you to prepare a curriculum and all the kind of take all those fixed costs that comes with at the municipality level for having 2-year preschool in your municipality, it's just unreasonable if there's only one center that's going to be in the treatment group in the end. So for the small municipalities, we did a separate randomization. Either all units went to the treatment or all units went to the control group. But then we were left with quite a few large municipalities in the sense that it makes sense to do within municipality center level randomization. So we first, in order to stay in budget, we first randomize which large municipalities are going to be part of the treatment, and then within each municipality, we had to now solve this challenge that this is a treatment that can happen only at the center level, but it needs to be, the treatment status needs to be assigned to children. So what we first did was that, okay, we took, like, on the spring, when we did the randomization in the spring, and the preschool would start in the fall, so we first assigned, or the kids who were already in centers in the spring, they would get their treatment status based on whether the center got into treatment or control. That sounds easy, and it should be easy with our great register data, except that our register data is not that great in the end. So we actually had to create, there was some register data that we could use as a baseline, but we actually had to ask municipalities, is this correct? And it was not correct all the time, in many cases. So we basically created a new register of where kids actually are at the time of randomization. A trickier thing is that not all 4-year-olds are in a daycare. So about 15% of the kids who needed to be part of the experiment were at home. And these were the kids who we were particularly interested about, since for them being invited to preschool would likely have a much larger effect. For them it would be center-based versus home comparison rather than one type of center to other kind of a center. So then this is where the legislation really became handy, because we could then tell the population register that we need the population register with address information. And then we just created basically catchment areas for all daycare centers in Finland. So this was us taking the population register and the location of centers, figuring out that here are the kids who are not in any center, what is the closest center to them, and then we assigned those kids close to center A, they would be assigned to center A, and so forth. Once we had this, we threw away the ineligible centers, those which didn't have preschool and normal daycare, and then we randomized the remaining in the treatment and control, with about 40% going to the treatment and the rest to the control. And then those leaflets that I started with would be sent to these kids either in the treatment center or living close to a treatment center. And the control group got also a letter, but that was like, that was not color print. It was just saying that you're in the control group, you don't have to do anything. Good. Now, I'm not going to dwell too much into this, but one of the things that we learned while we were doing this was to do what's known as restricted randomization or re-randomization. And this is an idea of that, even though in expectation, treatment and control groups are going to be similar, but you can get unlucky as a researcher. So just by chance, you may take a treatment group that actually is different from the control group. So in order to guard against that, what you can do is that you can do, like in our case, we ran the randomization for 1 million times. So that we had like a vector of 1 million different kind of alternative ways this could go, like which center would go to treatment and control. And then for each one of those 1 million kind of potential assignment vectors, we just calculated like what's the balance on background characteristics, those background characteristics that we observed. And we took the 2,000 best ones. So we were end up like with 2,000 potentially kind of good ways of dividing the population into treatment and control. And then we picked one out of those 2,000 randomly. So that improves covariate balance and gives you some statistical power. But in this case, the big benefit was that this ensured that we stay in budget. Since we have like 30 million euros to spend, which is a lot, but then But some of those centers are much larger than the others. So we could have been unlucky in a way that, like when we did those million assignments, sometimes we went over the budget like 2 million euros if everybody would comply. And you don't want to end up into that situation. So in addition to having kind of background characteristics being balanced that we insert with the re-randomization, we also threw away all those assignments that would lead us to going over budget. And that's actually something that's really helpful when you think about how to practice how to implement this. Kind of those of you who love statistical inference, and there's many in this room, this is really, really cool, because once you know what the potential assignment vectors are, then you can get the exact p-values. This is what Fisher was writing about in 1935. Like, you go through all the possible kind of ways of splitting the sample, and then you look at what you actually find and compare it to those. What would have happened if you just randomly split people into treatment and control? If your true effect is larger than what you would get by random, then you have statistical significance. All right, so that's very nice. Another kind of important, kind of a nerdy but important point is that we're going to measure effects on 6 outcomes. So you have to take into account the multiple hypothesis problem, and so we pre-registered how we do it, and this is good practice. Here's just what we expected to have. So about 1,000 centers, about 18,000, about 35,000 children in treatment and control combined. And this is what the covariance balance actually looks like. So this is now using the data that we used to study the effects. These are not the same covariance as we used in randomization, but we do very well in 2016 and not so great in 2017, so 2017 birth cohort. The reason is that we could do the randomization at center level and only once. So kids who were born in 2016, they were already in the centers or living close to the centers, and that's like a very poor randomization. They can't manipulate their treatment status, or their parents can't. But next year, the parents, if you're a parent who has a kid born in 2017, you will now learn that this center is participating in 2-year preschool and the other one is not. So you can move your kid into that center and kind of get yourself into the treatment group in a sense that we do not observe that you did that. So this is a form of non-compliance that's particularly hard for us. And there was an incentive to do this because preschool is free of charge. So what we see is that better educated parents, natives, were more likely to find them in a treatment group. So this is not great news for a researcher, but it turns out that this is not a problem. Let me see. Once we look at our outcomes, the effects are going to be very similar for both of the birth cohorts. We can control for many things. In the end of the paper looking at the effects, we are doing a lot of work to at least we are ourselves very convinced that this is not a problem. But you can write the whole paper with 2016 cohort only, which doesn't have this problem. You will get exactly the same conclusions, but less precision. Good. Okay. Now, that's the part that I know how to do as an economist. So, randomization, all these sort of complex data things that we did, like really cool things to do when you know how to do this. But then, as Hannu was telling us, we don't actually have outcomes collected on regular basis in Finland. So all of a sudden, I think the real challenge for the team who designed the experiment or the research design part was that how do we know what these kids actually know? And the whole point of the experiment is to figure out whether they are better prepared to start their education. both on academic and, more importantly, on socio-emotional skills. So that's when I called Katarina Salmelaer, a famous, unfortunately now late, professor at the University of Helsinki, and asked her, like, you're the only one I know who's kind of in this world of kind of educational science proper. Can you help me out? Like, who are the best people in Finland to do this? Unfortunately, she was, it's very good that I knew one person, not 0 persons. So then, since this helped me to then find a fantastically good group of educational scientists, we actually end up working together in many projects now because of this practical issue that I had to solve. So the great thing about the educational scientists is that, as Hannu was telling you, they're really keen on measuring things. We're very keen as economists on thinking about causal inference. When you put those things together, that's actually really cool. So what we ended up doing was to collect or to evaluate academic and socio-emotional skills of about 30,000, like 35,000 kids were in the target group. Not everybody participated in assessments. But ages 5, 6, and 7, we would get kind of a thorough assessments of wide range of skills. And then another thing that educational scientists are very good at doing is running surveys on how teachers think about these things, how parents think about it, what actually happens in those centers, what's different in the treatment and control group, and that sort of things. So these are like super complementary things to our knowledge. Once we have the evaluations, we take them to Statistics Finland and link all sort of register-based data to those assessment data. So this gives us a very rich sense of the background characteristics of these families. But then over time, this will also allow us to follow these children throughout their lives. So kind of in a very long term, somebody else hopefully will be looking at what happened to these kids in their 50s. So that's all. That's again the beauty of doing this in a Nordic country, is that you have this resource, even though it wasn't enough for pulling this thing off. It's now like complementing that with your own data just creates fantastically good data. So how did we manage to do this? So measuring skills of a 5-year-old is a bit hard since they don't know how to read. So what happened was that each child would sit down with their teacher for about half an hour, and teacher and an iPad, and the teacher would read from the iPad, and the kid could kind of just point to the right direction or not. So some of you, I'm seeing that some of you recognize that this is Ramin Isadia, the lead author of this paper, who was a PhD student at the beginning, and he became the kind of de facto operational manager, working as a senior researcher now at VAD, to kind of get this thing done. I mean, it's 148 municipalities, 1,000 daycare centers, and then there's 1,000 elementary schools as well. You have to be in contact with all of them, and you have to tell them that, you guys need to do these assessments. So we're gonna send you, do you have iPads? Do you have headphones? All these sort of things need to be done. There was a call center where they could call and, ask like, we can't log in, and all that sort of things that logistics needed to be done. Important part of it was also to create these videos on how to do the implementation. So here's Ramin and Ramin's daughter, who are the stars of this. So this also kind of gives you a sense of what the shoestring operation this is, that we had to, use child labor, unpaid, kind of from research teams' kind of homes. But it actually worked out very nicely. But one thing when we think about how costly this was, that's part of our cost-benefit analysis. Notes that there was 35,000 hours of teachers' times used for these assessments at age 5 and 6. At age 7, there was only 3,000 hours of teachers' time, because now the kids they still couldn't read at the start of the first grade, but they were at the level where they can put on headphones and the whole class can do the assessment on their own. So what did this assessment look like? So this is from the 5-year-old. So this would be a question format. What it says to the teacher, say to the child, this picture has 4 dogs and 3 cats. How many animals are there in total? And then the kid will answer, and the teacher would write the answer there. This would say, the teacher would say to the kid, show me the pillar, and then the kid would point in the iPad. So that's for the academic part. But the more important part was the socio-emotional part. That was what preschool is supposed to focus on. And even with the assistance of a teacher, a 5-year-old can't really assess her socio-emotional skills. So what we asked the teachers to assess those. So there's kind of a standard kind of instruments for kind of standard surveys asking, like I think something like 62 questions. We asked the teachers to assess the kids. And the teachers know these kids quite well. They spend more time with them than their parents do. So this is not like a crazy thing to do. But of course it does contain, it is important when we interpret the results to remember that what we call socio-emotional skills is how the teacher sees this child. And one of the things that's really interesting in this data is that we get multiple adults to assess the same child. So there's all sort of interesting results to be done later on. But let me just show you here. We did pretty good job in terms of response rates. So we are around about 90% of children we get the assessments for. So it's not 100%, but this is much better than if you think of a normal survey design. You rarely see response rates like this. And this is, of course, because schools and daycare centers are the perfect place to do all sort of surveys and assessments because the kids are there. So you just use one class to do it. Okay. I only have 3 minutes and I try to keep in time. So let me just say a few words of what the treatment actually looks like. So this you already saw. This is, and now the real question here is, suppose that the parliament writes legislation that says that Finland will now have a 2-year preschool. And what happens then? Like, what does this kind of announcement, does it actually do? So the aim of the experiment was to simulate that to as closely as we can. So we wrote that kind of legislation basically. It just applied for kind of half of the municipalities, and within them 40% of children. The national. The OPH, the government organization that writes curriculums for all levels of education system, wrote a curriculum for this 2-year preschool. And if you read through that kind of national level curriculum, it actually looks a lot like the curriculum for 5-year-olds in daycare. Since 5-year-olds also participate in pretty kind of construct kind of play-based learning activities. So in our final report there's a lot of research on kind of how this national curriculum turned into local and center level curriculums. But I think the takeaway is that they're not actually very different. There's a little bit of emphasis on foundational academic and socio-emotional skills in the treatment group, but not so much. The other thing that changed was that teachers had slightly stricter qualification requirements, and if we look at who the teachers are, we actually see a very large difference between treatment and control groups. So I think the important number there's a 6% higher likelihood for a child in a treatment group to have a teacher who's qualified to be a teacher. So that is kind of a very important policy debate in Finland at the moment of where do we get enough qualified teachers. Within those qualified teachers, they're much more likely to come from the university degrees rather than from the polytechnic degrees, which are the two ways of becoming a qualified teacher in Finnish daycare. The second big difference from the kids' perspective is that they're going to be in groups where there's only 5-year-olds or 5 and 6-year-olds, whereas the treatment or the control group, typically you're in the same group with 3, 4 and 5-year-olds. And they use a little bit more time in guided activities and less time in routines. So that's to the extent we can characterize the treatment, and that's what our estimates will then tell about how does this bundle of different inputs to the treatment group, do kids kind of perform better in these assessments than those in the control group with in that way different bundle of inputs. But I'm now running over time, so let me just conclude quickly, and I think there's at least 4 takeaways here. The first one is that you can pull this off. I mean, this is a very complex experiment. Had I known that I have to do this, I might have not gone to the Ministry of Education in that very first day. But still, it's feasible, and it's going to be easier the second, if you have to do something like this again. This feasible partly because we have this fantastic data infrastructure in the Nordic countries, but the lasting effect of doing a research like this or an experiment like this, where you actually have to collect new data, is that you will have that new data then also for other research topics. And particularly in a country like Finland, where we do not do national assessments of any kind of skills, and I don't think any country does kind of systematic national assessment on socio-emotional skills anywhere. The kind of the side product of an RCT like this is a research data that I expect to lead to hundreds of articles. And the last thing I want to say is that one thing where you see this kind of continuation across governments is that our current government wrote into their agenda that these follow-up, these assessments will continue until 9th grade. They didn't remember to put any money on it, so it hasn't happened yet, but surely it will. And that will kind of both benefit and contribute to the data infrastructure. So I guess it's time to stop now.
Yes, thank you, Matti. No results yet, but there's one more reason to read the final report that will be coming out, the final issue of the Nordic Economic Policy Review that will come out in the spring. But before that, we will have 2 comments, starting from Morten, and we discussed your last name, and I'm not going to try that, but Annika says it's Krægpøth, and then you swallow the rest.
Yes.
Floor is yours.
Thank you. Yes, so my name is Morten Krægpøth, and it's difficult for even Danish to pronounce, but okay. And I think I'm here in the role of I think it was where you're sitting actually. You're sitting, the presenter. You're sitting there. Okay, so my role is the constructive civil servant. I think I'm from the Danish Ministry of Education and Children. Yeah. So first of all, I would like to thank you all for the opportunity to read and comment the article draft. I think it's a really interesting project, and I think it's a paper and with the results that could inspire even beyond Finland. So I will say some words about that later. It seems that the RCT is really thoroughly thought out, even though the short time frame that it's that there was to develop it. And then I'm really impressed by the support that seems to have been on the project, and that's also something that I will try to say something about a bit later. So yeah, so I have 2 kind of comments. The first one is that I'm sure that the
You have to change the slides for us too.
Oh, sure. Oh, sorry. Yeah, that doesn't help anything. It's the big one, right? I'll keep this in. The next one. Yes, so the big one. Okay. So I have two kinds of comments. First, I'm sure that the paper is relevant for Danish readers. And therefore I would like to be able to compare the changes that is in the Finnish system to the Danish system, and I guess a Norwegian and a Swedish reader would think the same thing. And so then the second I'm going to talk about is some thoughts of RCT design, and it's mainly based on recent experiment that is being conducted in Denmark right now on school meals. Yes. Okay. So comparing the systems. So this is a simplified version of the Danish system, where you have the children from roughly age 1 start daycare, what I've translated to daycare. Then at age 3 they go to kindergarten, and then kindergarten class starts at age 6, and then it's a 1 year, and then you start in grade 1. So in Denmark, school starts in when the child turns 8, and my point here is that first of all, the big debate in Denmark about daycare and kindergarten is the quality of the institutions. There's we have done some reports that quite unfortunately shown that the quality of these the daycares and kindergartens are not at a very low level and unsatisfactory. But there's another big discussion in the Danish school system, or the preschool system, that is more related to the paper here, and that's what I've tried to show in the second column. That's called før SFO, and før SFO is something that I could try to translate to English by after school care. So it's actually, there's an after school care program that is when you go to kindergarten. There's an after school program, and then in some municipalities, children actually enroll in school in the spring instead of August, and start participating in this after school care. And that's not uncontroversial in Denmark. So people who are pro this, they talk about that it gets a more smooth transition to school. So they start in school, and this is happening within the school. And then the cons is that it's cheaper for municipalities because there are fewer adults per children in these. And I think so. So my thought is that maybe some of the results from this preschool experiment could be relevant in this Danish debate. Okay. Comparing Denmark to Finland school systems, the first thing coming from the Danish Ministry of Education is that is PISA test, and Finland is historically done really, really well on PISA test. Then I tried to look into coverage of kindergarten and daycare, and it seems that even though Denmark has a bit higher, that especially in what I would call kindergarten age, the take-up is roughly the same. So the country seems pretty comparable. In Denmark, there's also a lot of local autonomy in adaptation of national curriculum, especially in kindergartens. And then I've noted that with a question mark, no standardized testing in Finland. I've gotten confirmed today. And then one thing that I seem to remember is that when we talk about Finland doing well on PISA test, is that it comes out that the teachers' educational level in Finland is high, compared to Denmark at least. Okay. So this is my luckily your bar charts look a lot like mine. So this is what I had in mind when I was reading the paper, and then I drafted this. But the thing is that it's difficult for me to try to understand this. The preschool, what is it? Is it more comparable to the Danish kindergarten class, which is set at schools, and or is it more comparable to the last year of kindergarten in Denmark? And then the the next thing in this is that you discussed it, but it is difficult to get your hand on what is actually changing here. What is the policy? What is so you said within a Finnish setting is what is the effect of passing this bill, but translating that to an English context is difficult because you need to know actually what is it comparable to. Okay, so and then there's also this change in staff education level that also so you also could worry about general equilibrium effects of this and what is actually, because if it is what's precisely going on and what's driving the effects could also change what the policy you actually should be doing after this experiment. Yes, and then one question to this also is I'm not sure if you collect data on how this is implemented. So there's a lot of degrees of freedom, but it's unclear to me how it's if you collect any data on that. Okay, so thoughts on the RCT design. We have several other talkers have talked about this, but I have this. So an RCT could either try to answer the question: why preschool? Why should we do this? Why should we spend money on this? And how to implement. What is the best way to do preschool? And it makes sense to, from a government perspective of education, of Ministry of Education, to look at why preschool in the first case. But the next logical question is how should we implement? So the municipality of Helsinki, who talked earlier, would quickly say, so who implemented it best, and which municipality should we copy on this? And I'm not sure. So as I said before, I'm not sure that you collect data on these differences in implementation. Okay, so this one, let's see if I can. So selection of outcomes. You spent some time on discussing how you have collaborated with the research in education on how to get the right results, but I also think that it's relevant to think about that policymakers might not agree what the goal of a policy is. So some politicians might think that it's the academic performance, or others could think about school readiness, and some could even emphasize this social emotional. So and there might also be multiple goals that the politician wants to achieve, and then you could have all these questions. So can all goals be measured? And there's a practical limit on how many outcome measures you can collect. And of course there's the multiple hypothesis testing that you talked about. And then there's does policymakers know what precise goals? So are they even can they articulate what they're aiming at? And then are they vocal or not? And vocal enough about what they want from this policy for the researchers to be able to balance them in a relevant way. So one, I think there was a first presentation. It said that keep the researchers close when you do a design experiment, and I was sitting thinking also keep the policymakers close when you design data collection. Yes, and then the thing is that if the policymakers, they don't find that, especially what they're interested in is where the effects are. What do they think about will they use these results in the policy evaluation, or if it's not measured, or yeah. So the idea here is, I think I said it. So is it the goal of an academic test at age 7, or is it the curiosity or school readiness? Okay, so then there's this thing, maintaining broad support. So in Denmark, there's not always a board-to-board for quantitative policy evaluation, and especially data collection. So we try to be careful to gain and preserve acceptance from the involved stakeholders when we do data collections. So what we experience and what we are worried about is that if the teachers or parents don't find the experiment or the data collection relevant, compliance might drop. If teachers feel that data collection takes time away from implementing a good preschool, so you talked about how many hours they spend, they could find this like all this too academic and and then I stayed here in Denmark, they would complain. So we try to be careful not to disturb more than necessary. And then it's not only to get the right data doing the data collection, but also because it's hopefully a repeated game that you want to do another experiment at another time, and then coming and saying you want to use all these hours collecting data. And then also we do this, that we almost always make sure that the schools get early access to the data, so they could use the data collected in their everyday. And then the additional consideration, you talked about it, but what is so? I couldn't find it in the paper. So what is the cost of the treatment relative to the control? Is highly relevant. And then, given that this paper is about implementing the RCT, I'm also very curious about the price of the RCT. So everybody here agrees that the RCT is the best way of evaluating policy, but one could consider is it cost effective, and one should consider cost effectiveness in this. And then the details about children in home care are it's hard to follow. So it's and then some thoughts about keeping them out, yes, looking into robustness or subgroup analysis on those. And then the last big question: do you anticipate a willingness in the Finnish public to engage in even more far-reaching experiments? That's my comments.
Okay, thank you very much. Very good questions, especially related to the future willingness of experiment more if the current experiments turn out not to be as we hope them to be. But we also have another comment. Ingeborg Solli from the University of Stavanger has promised to come to this, and so sorry, sir.
Thank you. I left my written notes at the hotel in Helsinki, so I'll manage. Thank you, and thank you for a very nice presentation and also the comments. And I think in general the whole day has been very interesting and very useful. Thank you for inviting me. Let me say immediately that the reason why I'm invited to comment on this paper is that we did a very similar intervention in Norway 10 years ago. So I know quite a lot about the fuss before doing this kind of intervention, and yeah, there I see it. So my overall comment and impression of this paper and the presentation is bravo. I'm so impressed by the work you did. The experiment is so well designed, it's so well executed, and I know you had lots and lots of work managing to do this. The first experiment we did that was similar to this had 700 children. At that time, we considered that a large-scale experiment. You have 30,000 children in your experiment. This has been a major job, and as far as I can see, it has been done very thoroughly and thoughtfully. Also, the paper, so your presentation now, you don't want to reveal the results. And also in your paper, it's not really a research paper, it's more like a report for policymakers and researchers who would like to do an RCT. And I really like the way I enjoyed reading your paper so much. I really like the way you lay out all the choices you need to make and how you also elaborate on the pros and cons of different, with different alternatives. And you argue why you make the choices you do. And sometimes also you say, hindsight, we did the wrong choice. That is not how we should have done it. I think this paper will be extremely useful for policymakers and researchers going forward. And of course, I'm extremely curious about the results and will follow you close now. So it's quite soon coming up, I understand. And also, I would like to address a bravo to the Finnish government. I hear you say that the Finnish government should look to the other Nordic countries. I think it's mostly in terms of access to standardized tests during school. Well, I think the Nordic countries should look to Finland and say bravo. The culture, and you do talk quite some about this in your paper as well, and you mentioned it in your presentation. The culture of experimentation, how willing the Finnish government is to conduct experiments before a full-scale rolling out a new reform to the full population, I think is very, very impressive. So a bravo to and also you even have an RCT unit in the Prime Minister's office. Wow! I think it's good. We do actually now have a big scale RCT coming up, and we will hear about that later. It's a tax reform, which has triggered a huge public debate in Norway. So perhaps we're getting closer to Finland in terms of this. I've given my bravos. And I was asked also to come up with suggestions for improvement and to say something about the Norwegian experience. Having my bravos in mind, it's not really easy to come up with suggestions for improvements on your paper, but I've really now been squeezing the juice out of this, and I do actually have some comments. Yeah, so this is the headline. It's a bravo. A couple of thoughts on threats to internal validity. So this sounds very nitty-gritty, but the thing is, the magic with RCTs is really the internal validity. It's that the sample is balanced and that the randomization is successful. And I do think that you address this very well in your paper, and I'm sure you do it even more in the research paper. I haven't read that yet. But at least in the paper I read now, there are some issues you do not address at all. And I think they deserve to be addressed. One thing is that you say, because you do give quite some freedom to local authorities to implement the reform. I think that is important, and I think there is a fine balance, an important balance here, because if local authorities are not giving some ownership to the intervention, you will not really manage to do this very successfully. But that also creates quite some variation, a regional variation, or perhaps even within municipalities. And what you say is that municipalities relocated the most qualified teachers to treated centers. This is not good, no. Because it's not only about giving treated centers better teachers, it's also about taking the good teachers out of the control centers. So you have a treatment effect on the control group. It is what it is, but I think it's important to address, and also maybe an important lesson for other researchers and policymakers in terms of how much ownership should the local authorities have when implementing such a reform. And the second point, you already mentioned this, so you had 2 cohorts. You do see that the second cohort, it's somewhat biased, possibly because parents select into the treated centers. But you also see that because you do lose some centers from the first to the second cohort, which is fine, but it seems to be not very balanced. You're losing more of the control centers, and that could actually be related to the fact that they lost the very good teachers, and they end up dropping out. I don't believe this is a big issue, but I think it deserves to be addressed. And the last point, which I'm not sure is like an internal validity, but at least it's a point. The testers, and that's the teachers, they are not blind to treatment. I know you developed a huge test battery, and you developed the infrastructure to conduct this testing of 30,000 children. It's incredible. But especially for the socio-emotional tests, like you said, so it's really how the teacher sees the child. And the teacher knows that this child is in a treated center. And that is something that also could have an impact on how teachers respond to these questionnaires. And then the treatment, and that's, you also mentioned that here, it's a bundled treatment. And I think it's hard to avoid that. There are lots of things going on. These are real human beings, and it's in society. But for all you know, the effects you find, if you find some, is due to higher qualified teachers and nothing else. It is what it is. But to the extent that it's possible to dig into this, would of course be very important to understand your treatment effects. As I said, we did a very similar RCT in Norway 10 years ago. And since you are so secretive with your results, I would like to show you our results. It's like in what we say in Norway, you keep your cards very close to your chest. I won't tell us, I'll tell you. It's a or actually it's 2 RCTs. They're very similar. So similar, I don't even need to tell you what they're about. It's introducing a structured curriculum with play-based activities, with the clear intention of stimulating numeracy, literacy, vocabulary. I think even the test battery is very similar to the one you use. The institutional setting is very similar, Norway, Finland. We're talking about like adding another year, 1 year earlier, with the preschool as the current situation. So altogether, we had 2,014 children. As I said, what we consider to be a very large-scale experiment at the time when we conducted this. But of course, nothing compared to what you have in your sample. And so, what do we find? So we even have the same test waves as you do. So we have a baseline, we have a post-intervention, and we had a follow-up in 1 year later. We are looking for the same outcome measures. It's on math, on literacy, and on executive functions. So, okay, these are the Ani Banani. That's the math test. It's a little monkey counting bananas and so. We have the vocabulary test and the digit span, which is a working memory executive functions test. What we do find is we find a treatment effect on math, and we find a treatment effect on executive functions. We do not find anything on vocabulary. And we have been trying to understand why that is, and I think one reasonable explanation is that Norwegian kindergarten teachers are already very well trained in dialogical reading, to working on reading, working with books, talking to children, while many of them are a little bit scared of the math and the numeracy part. So I think the potential for raising children on the math and numeracy is a lot bigger than on the reading part, and that may be why we were successful in increasing the learning within math, but not within reading and vocabulary. I think this is actually quite overall that many teachers and parents are a bit reluctant when it gets to teaching and training their children in math, while reading is easier. And so this was 10 years ago. So now these children, they're 14 years old. They will finish mandatory schooling next year. And in Norway, as opposed to Finland, we actually do have standardized tests. So what we already have collected data for first, second, and third grade in math and reading, and in 5th grade. We are waiting for the 8th grade. We still don't have it, but we have for these first, second, third, and 5th grade. And these are still data we are working on. It's not published. It's only preliminary. Do not quote. But this is what we find. On math, we find consistently the same results in 1st grade, 2nd grade, 3rd grade, and in 5th grade. It's about 10% of a standard deviation. It's very consistent, and it's quite surprising how, because what we very often see with these educational interventions is that quite early the effect starts fading out. That is a short-term effect that fades out. What we seem to find here is just like it's a very persistent, robust effect. That's on math. And on reading, we find a similar effect, although we did not find any directly after the intervention. That we haven't really figured out yet, how that could happen. But what we also know is that there are some kind of dynamic complementarities between different skills, and it may be that some of the skills we manage to, like the working memory from the intervention, may have boosted somehow reading skills later. But this is something we are still working on. So that I'm looking forward to see how the Finnish results look like. If this is like a teaser of what you may find. Yeah, that's what I had. And congratulations on whatever your results are, congratulations on a very well-designed, successful experiment. Thank you.